Genevieve, thank you so much. Your work is truly inspiring and so needed right now. We do have an announcement to make. We have a slight change to our upcoming discussion. Unfortunately, Natasha Cloud had an urgent last minute conflict and she won't be able to join us today. But she does say sorry and she does want to meet all of the All-Stars. So she sends her best and looks forward to seeing the community very soon. So we're less than 60 days from the upcoming US election, and it's a very big deal. Leading our discussion next around increasing voter turnout, please join me in welcoming Stephanie Young from When We All Vote, as well as Genevieve Rowe of New Voters. Stephanie and Genevieve, how are you?
Great, Bima. How are you? Thank you so much for having us, and hello to all the All-Stars. This is such an exciting time for us to connect about issues that I think that we can all relate to, no matter if we live in the United States or abroad. So really happy to have a conversation with each and every one of you. I'm the Chief Officer for Communications, Culture, and Media Partnerships at When We All Vote. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit organization launched by former First Lady Michelle Obama in 2018, and we are on a mission to change the culture around voting. And we know that the Nike and Converse brand are at the forefront of culture, and so are all of you as All-Stars. So really excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. You all heard me talk for way too long already, but so excited to be here and to get a chance to talk with Stephanie and to all of the All-Stars and just learn so much from this conversation and hopefully give some knowledge as well. So
yeah. And Bima, I'll just give a lay of the land. We want this to be an interactive conversation. We're going to be talking about civic engagement, what that looks like. We're going to be talking about people power and voting. And we want you to be a part of this. So I know that there's a chat function. Bima's going to help us to make sure that we're including you in this conversation. This is going to be a brainstorm as well, because we really want to hear your ideas on how best to tap into youth voters. As you could hear from Genevieve's presentation, that there's so many young people who sit out of the process, and we want to make sure that we're doing all that we can to bring them into the fold and to give them the confidence and reassurance that their voice matters. And when they don't use their voice, somebody else will. I'll just briefly, before we kind of dig into the brainstorm and interactive session, I'll briefly just give you all a quick lay of the land of what's happening right now when it comes to voting here and even around the world. So right now in the United States in 2016, 100 million people sat out in 2016, decided not to vote. So when you think about the political parties that we have Democrats, we have Republicans, we have independents, the 100 million, that's the biggest party that we have in the United States, unfortunately. And we have to do something about that. When it comes to developed nations and leading democracies around the world, the United States lags behind when it comes to voter engagement and participation. We have countries like Belgium that have 89% of people voting, and countries like Sweden that had 85% of people voting. To have us at 47% is really disappointing. And we know that a lot of those are young people that we have to make sure feel empowered. And all of the wonderful things you were just talking about that are inspiring people, but not only that, connecting them and finding them where they are so critically important to bringing them into the fold, considering the huge voting numbers that the 18 to 24-year-old crowd actually has. And we know that this year there'll be at least 4 million Americans who will turn 18 by the November election. And Bima mentioned we have less than 60 days. We have 54 days. We have 8 weeks, which is like no time. And voter registration deadlines are really creeping on us. September 22nd is National Voter Registration Day here in the United States. And we know that that's a day that everybody kind of corrals to get as many people registered to vote, and we'll be doing a lot. And at the end of this conversation, we'll also have some calls to action that you can do to motivate the people in your life, either here and also abroad to help them get involved. So again, we want this to be interactive. We do know that the numbers don't look great, but I know that the energy and the creativity that everybody has can lend to the conversation to ensuring that we're increasing voter participation in each and every election. And we're also giving the power back to the people, because that's where the power belongs and nowhere else. So with that, I think that we can go ahead and get into the conversation. You ready, Genevieve?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm going to pose this question to you first, but would love to hear what you guys have to say about this. And one quick thing before I kind of go into this is that I had the privilege of growing up in Cape Town, South Africa for 4 incredible years of my childhood. And that was during the time of apartheid, the transition from apartheid to democracy. So I got to witness the first democratic elections in South Africa, which is monumental. Now that I think about it, I was 8 years old to 12 years old, and my parents participated in voter registration drives there. We had voter education drives as well to teach people, how to vote, show them what a ballot looks like. So voting has always been in my blood. I never even realized it. But what was so powerful about that moment, what I remember most, besides the fact that the amazing Nelson Mandela became the president, was that I saw the long, long lines of people. I'm talking about miles long of people saying, no matter what it takes, we're going to make our voices heard. So that moment is like forever etched in my mind, in my spirit. And I understand that people really do want to be a part of the process when they have access, which is extremely important. And as we know, people of color, Black people, were left out of the process in South Africa. And we see that happening here as well. But we know that the more access, the more opportunity you provide for people to vote, they will. So with that, when I think about my time in South Africa, when I think about just how we're looking at the world, and when I think about how democracy is a 2-player sport, you can't have one side and not another side. It has to be an interactive thing. I want to know, what does democracy look like to you? So make sure you put that in the chat. What is a word that comes to mind when you think about democracy? And then Genevieve, I'll turn it to you. What does democracy look like to you?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Stephanie. And it's so incredible, like your childhood story. And I can imagine that was a really impactful moment and obviously impacted where you are now. So that's super cool to hear. So for me, democracy, I think Congressman John Lewis said it best: democracy is not a state, it is an act. And I think that for me, it starts with an informed voting populace, and that I think that starts in schools and in balanced media and correct information being out there so that people are best prepared for what's going on. And there is a lack of civic education, specifically in a lot of public schools around the country. And I think that has a huge way of making democracy break down. And this is also, it starts with education, educated voting populace, and it's supported by breaking down these barriers to make people, basically re-enfranchise people, specifically from Black and Brown communities who have been stripped of the right to vote due to legislation, lack of civic education. And so to me, a strong democracy is an educated and active voting populace, and that is achieved by education and breaking down barriers. Personally, being a rising junior, I guess I'm taking a leave of absence, a rising junior in college, I've seen so many of my peers fill out absentee ballots and send them in and have to pay like ridiculous amounts of money to express ship them, had them rejected, had to send multiple times, received their absentee ballot like a day before or even after the election happened. And registering people out of state is insane. Election day is on a Tuesday. And like, there are so many things in place specifically for young people and for communities that have historically been disenfranchised, non-English speaking communities, Black and Brown communities, that there are so many barriers that make us currently living in what is, I don't consider a full democracy at the moment. And I think I've been asked a lot also, doing voting work, like if someone came up to you and asked you to register them to vote and they were a different party than you, what would you do? And that's a no-brainer to me. I think that, if the majority of people in America believe a certain thing should be done, I'm not going to block them from doing that. Even if my opinion is outside the will of the majority, like that is what I will fight for. And there are protections in place in democracy to protect the minority's opinion. So I think that it's, equal access, equal education, and just a lot of work is to be done. And there's a lot of incredible people already doing the work on the ground, whether it be in schools, on the streets, in Congress. So it's definitely been interesting, but there's so much more to do for sure.
Absolutely. And what I love that you said was that, would you register someone else from a different party? Absolutely. Voting is nonpartisan. I don't know what happened where people think that giving people the opportunity to vote became a partisan issue. That's not true. Again, the more access, the more opportunity for people to make their voices heard. And I think one thing to also think about as well when we talk about a healthy democracy, right, is that the will of the people is always a part of the process. And when you elect people to represent you and they don't represent you well, then you have to hold them accountable. So that's why voting and making that a habit, no matter where you live, is so incredibly important if you have the privilege to do that. Because if you don't, somebody else is making choices for you. And I know especially young people, especially this generation, Generation Z, is not going to stand for someone else making decisions and choices for them. And most importantly, you're not going to be able to complain if you don't vote. So make sure that you make your voice heard in whatever way, shape, or form. And another cool thing you brought up was like the fact that election day is on a Tuesday. How inconvenient is that for working families, for students, for young people? Beam, I don't know if we have any comments in the chat, but was really wondering too, from the countries represented, who has a national holiday for voting, which I think is super cool. If there's anything you want to share from the chat, we'd love to hear.
Yeah, we got a lot coming in from the chat. Couple comments here from, Ms. Fallback says, more diversity in government. Prufa says equality and having your voice regardless of social status, education background, race, and gender. A lot of comments around equality, Gen Z, freedom of speech, right? And so there's a lot of kind of that tone that's coming in around a couple of different topics that you've already touched on.
Yeah, and that's equality, equity, that's a huge thing. And that's usually what a democratic society is supposed to provide, right? Equity to access, equity to opportunity, equity to the best life that you can have for yourself and for your families. So yeah, super cool to get everybody's perspective on that. So I know that everybody's seen all the protests that have taken place around this country and around the world, I think, which is awesome. The fact that there's solidarity standing up for Black life and solidarity standing up for what's right. That's been super moving to me as an American, kind of looking out and seeing others kind of stand up for us. And I really think it's cool because it's our collective humanity. But what is so cool too is if you take that protest and you march on to the ballot box. So, as we're trying to talk to young people specifically, I keep saying young people, I am 36. I might not look it, but I am. So I'll keep saying young people, as we're trying to convince them to take that protest to the ballot box. What are some of the conversations that you're having, Genevieve, with your peers about that? Like, how do you help them to realize that, like, protest is just the beginning of your activism, and your activism can translate into your vote? And then one thing I'll just put out there, especially in the United States, what we know is that when you vote for your mayor picks your sheriff. Or your chief of police, rather. Or if you live in a place like Atlanta, where I'm from, you can vote for your sheriff, or you can vote for the district attorney, which becomes a prosecutor who does prosecute a cop or who doesn't prosecute a cop, or you vote for your governor who sets the tone as to how you fight a global pandemic, or you vote for your secretary of state who says what your elections will look like. Will they be fair, access, or will they be, polling places closed down and inconvenience and causing a havoc when it comes to you exercising your right to vote? So literally every vote counts, and everybody always thinks about like the president, but that's the top, right? So how do we help to convince people that a part of this protest that we've seen, a part of this civic unrest, and everybody using their voices to speak up for what they believe in, how do we help to convince people to move that to the ballot box?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good question. And I mean, it has been incredibly inspiring to see, like, my friends, my peers, just mobilizing around this. And I think the most important thing that I have, the recent national outcry for Black Lives Matter, the most important thing that I've taken away from it is that this is a movement, not a moment. And I think that, I think it's super important in all conversations about voting to acknowledge that there are ways to create change outside of voting. However, what you're doing can and will be supplemented by your vote. And, you can vote for people who are more amenable, even if they don't have the exact platform that you want, they're more amenable to your change. And you can convince them. Also, your voting keeps them accountable. So the preamble for new voters is, when it was created in 2016, was basically members of Congress in 2018, there will be 6 million more of us. We will vote and we will be watching. It's this idea that historically, young people have voted at around half the rate of their older counterparts. And this is made in politicians' head, this idea, I think I've mentioned this in the video, this idea that like they don't need to take young people's interests into account. And there was a huge jump in 2018, but we can make that jump even bigger. And like Stephanie was saying, the local offices matter so much to creating these policy changes that we desperately need in this country. And I think the biggest thing for me is having these conversations around voting for our generation is so important, because I know I grew up in, I'm from the suburbs of Philadelphia. It's like a very purple area. And we grew up being very disillusioned with politics, being very disillusioned with our politicians, and really honestly not being encouraged to go into public service at all. And I think that what we can do by voting, by talking about voting, by making democracy an accessible thing and translating, having the next step to a protest or the preliminary step to a protest or to any action that we're doing around a movement to be voting. I think what we do there is we create an avenue for people who hold our beliefs, people of our generation who, on the whole, have a consensus around what is important and what affects our generation more than anything else. We are creating an avenue for us to enter these spaces of leadership and actually see, young people at the forefront. You can run for city council at such a young age. You can, become old enough and then run for Congress. You can, there's so many things that I feel that the conversations have excluded us from because we've not been talking about voting, because we've not been showing up to the ballot boxes. And therefore, people with the agendas and people with the ideas that reflect what America needs aren't being in office because of that. So, you can protest and you're creating change and you are influencing who is making decisions, and local elections are decided by your vote. And honestly, like national elections can be decided by your vote.
Absolutely. And like what I loved that you said is that being at the table, you got to be there because somebody else will speak up for you. Mrs. Obama said, are you going to allow your grandma to pick out your clothes to go to the club? You're not going to do that. So why would you allow her to decide who's running your life with your elected officials? But Biba, I wonder if in the chat, if anybody has lent their voices into taking that protest to the ballot box or taking that activism a step further.
Oh yeah, totally. We have a couple of different comments: education and awareness, the demand for change, right? And then finding ways to channel that energy to the ballot box, as we've been talking about, using that creative energy to talk to your comrades, talk to your community. So a lot of that coming in right now.
Yeah, and with these change makers that we have on the line, some of you all can run for office wherever you are. And I think it's so incredibly important that folks like All Stars and others really, take it to the next level of how can you use your gifts and your talents, which you already are doing, but how do you take that to the next level? And we have to have the diversity, not just in race and sex and background, but also of age for those people who are at the table making decisions for our lives. Now, this is the last little brainstorm question that we want to pose to the group. And and I'm sorry, that's my computer. It's probably telling me I have another meeting coming up because we're literally 54 days out, people. So it's very serious right now. But, how do we harness the people power? It's a little similar to like taking, from protest to the ballot box, but, manifesting that grassroots energy that we see to really organize, right? I think it's taking it a step further, right? How do we take what we already have? How do we take the people in our lives and really try to organize and build towards something greater, either in our communities or states or countries, whatever that is. But you've done that with starting this organization. And a lot of people would not, they might be afraid to do something like that, but you've stepped out and you said, look, I'm going to take this on. And starting an organization is a lot of hard work. So what would you recommend, or what would you say to what are some of the best, I guess, tools of the trade to figure out how to harness the power of the people around you, that grassroots energy into a collective energy to do something good. And that goes to everybody that's a part of the conversation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. I think that, well, I'm no expert on it at all. I'm supported by an incredible family and an incredible team of people. Like the New Voters group, the New Voters, directors and interns are just the most fantastic human beings on the planet and get so much done. But I think that if I were to say, I'd say specifically around voting, I think there are ways to make voting and civic engagement super personal. And I think that's where I felt the most success in anything that I do is, you know, you're talking to someone and they feel really strongly about the environment. Talk to them about how direct legislation, you know, a pipeline being made or something that affects them personally where they live is relevant to how they vote. You know, I think something really big for me that has been a huge success of talking to high schoolers is that who you vote for decides what standardized tests you take in school. And that is a huge thing for a lot of people because I know that I did not like them. And I think that in terms of, you know, creating cumulative action, I honestly have to say, just like ask, like people are desperate to make a difference. And there's so many people telling us that we can't. Like there's so many, like whether it be because of your race, because of your age, because of your socioeconomic background, there are so many people telling you that like you do not have the ability to make change. And like as like a 20-year-old and I hope making some change in my area, I can tell you that you can and you will and you already are, honestly, if you're on this call. And I think that just asking your friends, like going into it with a plan of like a tangible goal and relating it to the people that you're talking to. Like for new voters, you know, we're registering 100,000 students by the 2020 election and breaking that down. It's like based on each student, how many are you registering? How many of these people would you already know? And what difference can this make?
Yeah, absolutely. Bima, is there anything in the chat that you want to share?
That was a big one. Some of the things coming in are be brave enough to start a conversation that matters. We have to fight to educate. We have these platforms. We need to use our art and make it visible. And then I think understanding that you can be leaders in your own respective communities. That's a big one. Genevieve, you're leading the way on that. And then don't be afraid to speak your mind, educate the people around you, and spread awareness.
That's amazing. And that actually leads to what we'll wrap with, which is really our call to action. And what I think is so special about us as a human race is that we all have our own talents and our own gifts that we're bringing to the world in some way, shape, or form. And I think, I mean, I'm not at the end of my life, but what I have concluded about life is that we really have to figure out how are we harnessing our gifts and how are we harnessing our talents, not just for ourselves and our well-being, but for others. And another thing I'd like to think about is that when we do go vote, we're at whatever country, you're in, whatever state you're in, it doesn't matter. When you go into that booth, you got to think about other people because we're all in this together. And this is what, sorry, I just muted myself by accident, but this is what the All-Star program tells me is that we're all connected, right? We're all inextricably linked to each other, and what you do matters to me and what I do matters to you. So here are a couple of calls to action. We'll have some graphics that you guys can post on your social media platforms that will be a part of the resources hub that When We All Vote will provide for the Converse team. Another thing you can do right now is have those conversations, those hard conversations that Bima just mentioned. Talk to the people in your family, in your life. Are you registered? Why not? Let me help you get registered and ready to vote. And if you do not live in the United States, do not worry. You can be a part of this conversation too. Text your friends, DM your friends in the United States and tell them they better be registered and ready to vote, because if not, you might have to unfriend them on a multitude of platforms. You can do that, but encourage them, because at the end of the day, what we do here in the United States affects everybody around the world, just like your countries affect ours. And one thing you can do too that's really easy is you can just text VOTE to 56005. Again, text VOTE to 56005. You can get registered right there. We have set it up for you. And then just make sure you follow When We All Vote, like everything that we do on Instagram and on Facebook. We just launched our new merch line, which we're really excited about, but we want to make sure that we're hearing from talented people like you all so that we're able to reach 18 to 24-year-olds. I know Genevieve is as well. Obviously, she is connected to each and every one of you because of this program, but it's so incredibly important that we're all using our collective voices for good. I have appreciated this time with you all. I hope that it's been informative. I hope that it's been inspiring, and I hope that you'll take some sort of action moving forward, because we're all in this together. So thank you, Genevieve. Thank you, Bima. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you for such an amazing conversation, super inspiring and very important right now. So just another call out to the community, make sure you vote and make sure you bring your friends to the polls.